Members wish to debate is Genesis Power Limited. The question is the report on Commerce Committee on the 2008-9 financial review of Genesis Power be noted. I call the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Chair, at the Press South Island Forum last month that the Prime Minister addressed, he made a very interesting comment. He said that if National were to go down the privatisation path, the most likely candidates for part sale would be state-owned energy companies. It's very, very interesting if you look at part of the alibi that the National Party have used for firstly raising this issue when Bill English sort of spilt his guts the day after the budget over and let the cat out of the bag over state-owned enterprises in respect to Kiwibank. The alibi that's been used by this government, of course, is that for a number of assets there will need to be a further capitalisation. And they say that in respect of further capitalisations, there's not enough money and not enough cookies in the jar. They're not going to use taxpayers' money, or they're reluctant to, so it should go on the block. But it's interesting, sir, if you look at Genesis Energy, because Genesis Power in February 2010 announced a $64.6 million half-year profit. Given the demand for electricity that's already on the rise and expected to continue to sir, even as we move out of the recession, it is likely, of course, that Genesis on projections will continue to expect large profits in the coming year. And of course that, and in the future, dampens down, if not negates, the National Party alibi that, hang on, we need to get rid of, either in part or in whole, these particular assets, especially, as the Prime Minister said, energy assets, because they will require further capital. Well, in this case of this particular asset, sir, and others that I'm sure excuse me, my colleagues will deal with later, they do not require, sir, certainly at the midpoint, further capitalisation. But it is a very, very telling comment, sir, that in the press forum the Prime Minister made specific reference to the partial privatisation of energy companies. He essentially said, sir, that these will be the ones that are on the block, first cabs off the rank, if they were to win an election for a second time. And then you look at the whole state-owned enterprises and the sort of ethos and ideas around selling energy companies and entities like Genesis Power. What has been put up by the Minister of Finance, of course, is that, to quote him, mum and dad Kiwis will be able to buy a slice of assets like Genesis Power. He says this will be great, this will put a great injection into our capital markets. The only problem, of course, with that argument, and of course mum and dad Kiwis aren't silly, is that mum and dad Kiwis all around the country already own Genesis Power, Meridian and others as we've gone through, Kiwibank, Solid Energy and the like. They already own them. They've already paid for them, in some cases twice, as the last government bought back assets that were on their knees thanks to the previous national government in the 90s selling them. Mum and dad Kiwis already own those assets. So Mr English and Mr Power and Mr Brownlee sort of challenged mum and dad New Zealanders to put up or shut up for a second time. Put up money that they've already spent in purchasing these assets through their taxes, and somehow feel good about the fact that they can buy them back again. And then there is, of course, the issue of who would purchase a slice or a percentage of a Crown entity or a state-owned asset like Genesis Power. Of course, in a recession where 70-odd% of the country, or if you go through electorates, I think it ranges from about 67% to 76% of New Zealanders earning $40,000 or less per year, once they get their little measly tax cut and they take into then account it's negated by 2.5% GST and 5.9% inflation, are $30 to $50 a week worse off. And then somebody who earns $1 million a year, some of the mates of the other side who receives $1,000 a week as a result of a tax cut, I think Kiwi mums and dads, we can work out pretty quickly, at least in this place and in most of the communities, who will be able to afford to buy a slice of an energy asset like Genesis Power. It won't be the 70-odd%, 67-odd% in that range of New Zealanders who are earning $40,000 or less per year, who are $30 to $50 a week worse off. It won't be them, because they won't have, of course, the discretionary spending power to go and sort of amble down to their stockbroker, to the stock exchange, have a chat to their broker and say, let's grab a slice of this. Let's spend $100 or $1,000, and let's do what Mr English says. Generous fellow that he is, and let us spend our $100 or $500 or $1,000 to buy a slice, as Kiwi mums and dads, Mr Chair, of Genesis power. It won't be those people, because they will not, of course, have the discretionary spending power thanks to that crew over there. It'll be the person, many of Mr Brownlee's mates, one of his best ones, Mr Henderson, we know in Christchurch, although he's in a bit of stock as we speak at the moment. It'll be Mr Brownlee's mates who are earning $1 million a year, and thanks to Mr Brownlee, he's given them $1,000 a week back in a tax cut. So it'll be that sort of person who will be able to sort of amble down in the Daimler, sort of mosey on down to the stockbroker and say, I'll have a chunk of that, thank you very much. Although more likely, I suspect, though, it'll be some of the people that Mr Brownlee and others deal with possibly on a daily basis. It will be those large financial overseas institutions who will be, as they were in the 90s, licking their lips to see if they can, of course, grab hold of a slice of a Crown entity, a state-owned enterprise, like a Genesis Power, like a Kiwi Bank, like a Solid Energy. Like a Solid Energy, my colleague says, yeah, like a fire sale. And of course, we remember Mr Brownlee, I think he did serve for a time in the Bulger government. We remember what Mr Bulger did in respect of Kiwi Rail. He was part, of course, Mr Brownlee was, of course, of a sort of fire sale government over the 90s. You don't think he was in government? Oh, he wasn't there. Oh, he wasn't there. He was a latecomer, was he? He was a latecomer. Oh, well, he is a member of a party, of course, that does have a legacy of fire sales in respect of the 9 years they were in government. So it will be those large foreign financial institutions. And then we have this point, that the National Party is extremely fond of saying that it listens to the people, it is engaged with the people, it is connected with the people. And we have an opinion poll, of course, and Mr Brownlee doesn't like this. You know, all the fingers and toes are used to sort of recalculate it when he sees it on TV at night, where 80% of New Zealanders say, we do not want, we do not wish, we do not want our assets, the remaining assets that we have, Crown entities like Genesis Power, sold, full stop, end of story, game over. So I make a prediction. Two things will happen. They will quieten down about this policy. Mr English will have been sort of gaffer-taped at this point and told do not talk about sale. It was interesting to note in a select committee hearing with Mr Power of State-Owned Enterprises Minister, I asked him, I said, Mr Power, you're SOE's Minister, have you ever talked to your cabinet colleagues, Mr Brownlee or Mr English, about Mr English's sort of articulation of a sale of various state-owned enterprises? Oh, no. Have you ever sort of dreamed about it? Have you passed him a note at cabinet over a cup of tea? Have you sort of done semaphore or something across the offices? Have you ever spoken, made a phone call, written a letter, ever discussed it in a cabinet? Oh, no. Never even dreamed about it. Never even seen a psychic about it to predict what Mr English might want to do after an election. Now, that lacks a high degree of credibility. There is no credibility in that an SOE's minister would not go and have a wee chat with the finance minister after he sort of spilt his guts the day after the election, talking about a policy that they didn't really want to talk about. And I say this, that these assets like Genesis Power are being readied for sale now under the guise of sort of economic efficiency. Because if they want to sell them, which they will the day after the next election if they win, you can't flick the switch and in 24 hours prep an asset for a sale, of course. But it will be very interesting to watch over the coming months if the government goes silent on this. Because the truth is, the undeniable truth, is that 80% of New Zealanders have wised up. They know they already own Genesis Power. They know that it was a con when Mr English said, oh, you can have a wee slice of it back. They know if it is put on the block, who will buy it? Not the Kiwi mums and dads, the big end of town, the foreign end of town, those foreign institutions. And they've turned round, when asked, by scientific pollsters and rejected it. 80% of them have rejected that. And I say that the government would be very, very wise to listen to the 80% of New Zealanders who've said no way. They've learnt. They've seen it time and again. They've seen what happens when assets are put on the block, and they say no. And it will be very interesting if Mr Brownlee in this debate and the other energy Crown entities that follow from here gets on his feet and tells us, after all the bluff and bluster, what he's going to do to help New Zealanders this winter in respect of their power prices and in respect of their being able to afford to heat their homes in a basic way. Because we know Mr Brownlee, of course, the great believer in insulation,